Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I just wanted to let everybody know that we'll be coming on in another minute or so. I just wanted to give it a little bit of extra time for other people to join. Welcome everybody to our Learn with Mage session. I am Cole Freeman, a developer advocate at Mage, and today we're going to be discussing how marketing and advertising agencies build analytics and automation into their systems that work day to day. So just a little housekeeping. LinkedIn and YouTube will be on a 30-second to 1 minute delay. So please just go ahead and type in your questions into the chat as soon as possible, and we'll answer them as they appear. That's just so when we get to the end, we're not having to, we're maybe potentially not missing a question. So with that being said, I'm excited to introduce Parker Goldman of Cannonball Advertising. Parker leads the data analytics and marketing technology team at Cannonball and specializes in building scalable analytics system with a focus on clean architecture and practical automation. Parker, I'll let you do a little more of the talking now, but just go ahead and tell us more about your role at Cannonball and how you got into advertising and marketing analytics.
Yeah, thanks, Cole. It's good to be here. So hello to everyone. I'll kind of start with my background and how I landed at Cannonball. So originally my background wasn't in software or data, but I kind of came into analytics through more hands-on data analysis that really started in Excel and kind of progressed to SQL so that I could pull directly from data sources and didn't have to rely on people to share the data with me. And from there, it kind of continued to compound as I, look for better ways to solve problems with technology as I kind of moved up some hierarchies. And but yeah, so I kind of tend to approach challenges from the lens of how can technology make this easier, faster, more reliable. And then once I start down that path, it tends to snowball pretty quickly. So at Cannonball, I'm fortunate I get to work across a lot of different areas. One of the core things that my team handles is analytics infrastructure and reporting infrastructure. We manage also all of our media related pipelines and automations using Mage Pro. And then we also get to work really closely with our media team during planning and execution. So we'll collaborate on campaign structure, naming conventions, tracking strategy, pixel placement, things like that, to make sure that our measurements aligned to the outcomes that our clients want to see.
Nice. That's awesome. And a great kind of introduction to the rest of our conversation. You mentioned using Mage Pro, but what other analytics or what other platforms are you using in your data stack? Kind of like what does a modern data stack look like for an advertising agency?
Yeah, so the modern digital world has expanded, quite a bit. So from a ETL and kind of data ingestion standpoint, when I came on board, I had to ask the question, is this something that I think a team of internal devs can maintain? And you quickly realize that the answer is no. So we went out to market and found a great partner in Improvato. They kind of act as our ETL partner. They've got a lot of off the shelf integrations already built that kind of pipe data into our data warehouse. So that's the next piece is BigQuery. We're a Google Cloud consumer. So BigQuery is our data warehousing choice. And then obviously you mentioned, and we're here today, we use Mage Pro for orchestration, Looker Studio for data viz and reporting. And then we also use a project management software called Podio that kind of helps us organize workflows and all that.
Okay, that's awesome. You've mentioned focusing on building practical and maintainable solutions. Kind of explain what that actually means in the context of an advertising agency. Where your clients really expect a serious return on advertising spending.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a big believer of keeping things simple, so not trying to over engineer the systems. We intentionally keep things as simple as possible. Complexity tends to slow the teams down if they have to think about how they're going to explain this to a client, and also just makes the systems harder to maintain. So, I think a good example of this is kind of how we look at media performance in general. We'll focus on giving our teams a unified view across platforms. Typically, at your typical agency, you'll see Facebook is reported on siloed from TikTok, siloed from maybe your programmatic advertising. But when our kind of data model that we've built out allows us to really easily see what's driving performance because you're looking at everything in the same table or same graph, right? So that allows our teams to move pretty quickly in terms of being able to see which channels are driving, really moving the needle. And then, we can drill down into those and we'll touch on this later, but, it makes it easy to see what's right for like creative optimization and things like that. So also, you asked the question on ROAS. Most people think of ROAS as dollars in and dollars out, and that is, of course, the classic kind of equation for that everybody wants. In Facebook Ads Manager, you want to see the largest ROAS as possible, which I'm not saying that you don't, you absolutely do. But there's also, I think, in terms of how we've designed systems, there's also an incremental ROAS in our efficiency. So what might take an agency that's doing this manually, for example, take like a recent campaign wraps and our team goes in and we can filter a dashboard in under a minute and have pretty actionable insights pretty quickly thereafter. A more traditional manual approach, you've got to go into Facebook and you've got to manually export that. And you got to go into TikTok and you got to manually export that. And then you got to go into your programmatic DSP and you got to export that data. And then you realize, oh no, like all this data doesn't fit neatly on top of each other. So you start to multiply the time that takes by the number of campaigns that you're managing. It really does add up. So, I think I always like to refer to that as kind of like our hidden ROAS of efficiency where, we pride ourselves on being able to give you more with just a little bit less.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I was interested in was what are all the social media type of platforms you're, dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but it seems like it's potentially all of them.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's always client dependent, right? Like
Right.
one client's target consumer might be materially different than another client's target consumer. So, you really have to do the research and understand, okay, who are we trying to speak to, and then back into the platforms that are right once you define the audience. So everything at Cannonball really starts with, we take a very, very kind of like behavioral science approach to things and understanding audience. And once we have that knowledge, then it makes it a lot easier to back into the channels that, are right for said audience.
Yeah, that's awesome. So kind of beyond some of the operational metrics, how are you surfacing insights that actually influence these campaigns and strategies, like for their creative decision making?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, at a basic level, right? Like identifying the creatives that are performing the best is really the relatively easy work. That's one of the benefits of like our data model is, we can drill down to the ad level and we can sort and filter by any metric that you could think of, whether that's a conversion, whether that's ROAS, whether that's CPMs. It makes it really easy to see, hey, these are the pieces of creative that are performing. Um, but the more interesting work starts after that, and I think this is one of those things where we take our media team is really great at summarizing, hey, this is what these are the creatives that are winning, but then also wanting to ask the question of why. And then when we start to ask the question of why, that's when we approach our strategy and behavioral science teams to evaluate the why behind the performance. Typically when we go to market with a campaign for a client, we've got some hypothesis. We will say, hey, we think these themes or this messaging will work based off of this psychological theory. And then when we kind of come back and say, hey, this is what won out, we can dive into the why behind that. And that really flywheels into, once we have that why, then we can go to the creative team, and the creative team is armed with just a plethora of gold in terms of information of, here's the thematics in the current themes that are working and what we can build on. And that also gives them some motivation when they think about, okay, what should we do next, right? This is what's working now, but how can we evolve that to work better in the future so that the next campaign stands on the proverbial shoulders of the prior campaign.
Yeah, that's awesome. How does your team I guess collaborate with the creative team? Like, is it kind of an easy fit? Like, how exactly does it work?
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky. So, we can walk across the to the other side of the office and have conversations with a pot of creatives and say, hey, this is what's winning. And we can grab somebody, the account lead and the strategy lead, and we can all get together and grab a room and say, hey, let's hash this out. Let's understand why this is outperforming something else. So that process is really, honestly, we're lucky. It's easy for us. It probably wasn't always easy, but we've flushed it out over enough years to where we've kind of got um, that process down, to how we kind of flywheel the front end strategy into creative on the initial, and then media can come in and say, here's objectively from the data what's winning out, and then it just kind of starts that process over where the strategy team can take in the objective data and dig into that why.
Yeah, that's awesome. So can you walk us through an example where your campaign data led to a pivot in strategy for the creative?
Yeah, so there's always one that kind of jumps to the forefront of my mind, and it honestly starts even before the raw data, and it kind of starts with the planning piece of how are we thinking about what we should be tracking and why. So we've got a local client who's kind of a fiduciary to the St. Louis area, and their whole mission is to highlight the positive stories and developments in the area. So, early on, what we realized was like our measurement framework wasn't necessarily aligned to what success actually meant for them. We were tracking things like website traffic, but there wasn't like necessarily like a super hard conversion. But we kind of stepped back and we asked like a simple question: is the goal to like get people to the site, or is it to get people to learn about the region and what's going on? And they do a great job of publishing awesome stories about small businesses, economic infrastructure, things that are going on in the region. And we were like, wow, like why aren't we tracking article reads? So how long have they spent on the page? Have they reached the end of the article, right? So we kind of developed what that conversion looks like. And once we aligned on kind of that being the North Star, then when we looked at the back end analytics of our campaigns to see what was driving people to read articles, we kind of drastically shifted what we were allocated into. So, we saw that certain channels, particularly programmatic video, for example, was really great at driving awareness, but people stopped after the video. They didn't feel that urge to go to the site and actually really read more about what was happening. So at the same time, platforms like Meta, Facebook, and Instagram were consistently driving really deep engagement rates and conversions on the website. So we made a recommendation to kind of reallocate money away from programmatic video, and in more into paid social. And what we saw is that year over year, this prior year, we had saw 136% increase in articles read, web sessions were up 109%, and total users grew by 90%. So that example doesn't necessarily talk about the specific creative. We did dive into some of the creative, but it does speak directly to how, when you kind of have good measurement aligned and you've got a good conversion that's indicative of what the client wants to see, and then you're looking at the back end of which channels are driving that behavior, and then you make those allocations, and then you see firsthand that just the back end of the website analytics are through the roof. It's really validating in terms of that process of that working. So that's one that I always kind of come back to as man, that was just a really great success story.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And do the clients tend to be do they tend to be accepting of the recommendations? How do you deal with any pushback or, some feedback from the clients that may not be in agreement?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that kind of back and forth and collaboration, which is what you want. Nobody ever has that, proverbial silver bullet of knowing exactly what to do at the right time. And clients have way better knowledge of their business than we really ever will, because they live it. I mean, we live it every day with them, but they're truly, truly in it. So, I think it's that balance of they've got that historical knowledge and we've got that maybe fresh perspective.
Yeah.
And the great thing that I love about marketing, there's certainly things that I don't love about marketing, but one of the things that I love about marketing is we have such a great ability to test things out. You could spend a couple $100 A/B testing something, and that might influence how you spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road. That's one thing that we will always say. We could be as wrong as we are right, but let's test it and find out, because the more that
Right.
we do that, the quicker we learn and the faster we can go in the direction that is beneficial for the business.
Yeah, and that's definitely all data analytics related for sure.
100%.
Um,
100%.
yeah, so kind of what's the process for closing the loop between your measurement and execution of a campaign? So how do insights from one campaign kind of inform the next?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of really touched on it. The media team at the wrap of a campaign or the wrap of a year, we're going to look and we're going to do the meta analysis of just the pure data analytics of what worked well. Did this theme outperform this other theme that outperform a third theme? We're going to take that back to the strategy teams and say, hey, this is where we netted out from a performance media standpoint. Then we dig back into the why. And then once we have the why, the creative team has, that formula for, okay, well, now that we know why, we can kind of iterate our process. We can change these things to be more in line with what is working. And it also is the jumping off point for creating new ideas. That's a big piece of it, is once we learn why things are working, then it makes it easier to come up and spin up new ideas that can stand on the shoulders of what we previously did right and learn from what we did wrong.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about marketing analytics in general. Let's go ahead and like chat maybe a little bit more about how you're using Mage Pro. But you've mentioned to me before that a lot of your pipelines focus on data validation. Can you kind of walk us through why that's so critical for you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things that I kind of love to dig into. And we kind of touched on earlier, that the getting to the what's working from a data standpoint isn't overly complicated, right? It's a lot of, what had the lowest customer acquisition cost, what had the highest click-through rate, what had the lowest CPM, right? It's easy to get to some of those metrics, but one of the most crucial things is being able to segment into theme A, theme B, theme C, or into video statics, et cetera, carousels, into the list of how we want to look at stuff goes on and on and on. And the only way that you can get there is with good, clean, in marketing, we call it taxonomy, is a fancy word for naming structures and naming conventions. When you have on the front end, when you've thought through thoughtful naming conventions for how you know that you want to break things out, whether that's comparing theme A versus theme B versus theme C, whether that's wanting to know specific in-platform placements. Um, you know, when you're doing the analysis, though, you have to be able to segment it accurately. Because if you can't segment it accurately, the foundation for what you're analyzing is completely off the rails. So what we have done and spent a lot of time on is we leverage Mage to run daily checks for exceptions in our naming structures for clients. So every morning at 5 a.m., we have a pipeline for each client that will run, and it will check, hey, here is the case statement for what this kind of slug of taxonomy should be. Should it be theme A, theme B, theme C? And if there's any null that comes out of that check, that's in a summary report that gets emailed to the team, that's at the top of their inbox every single morning. And it sounds, it goes back to this, like, keep it simple, stupid. It sounds so, bare bones logical, but you would be surprised at how frequently, in the rush to get campaigns up and to get these things up, especially when you're managing hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of ads, depending on your size, it is something that's very difficult, and it's not something that a human is going to be good at. Like, do you
Right.
want somebody that's manually sifting through a Google sheet or an Excel file every day for exceptions? No, like, define the exceptions in code, have that run, you know, autonomously in the background every single day, and have it raise its hand whenever it finds something that needs tending to. For us in kind of our media operations, that is such a huge component. And the reason that I always say, like, that this is so important too is the only time that people really ever realize something's wrong is when they're trying to answer the question of
Yeah.
how did this perform, right? Man, let's filter for theme A. Oh no, there's nulls.
Right.
And that's always like, then it becomes time critical because, man, like, I'm trying to answer this stakeholder question in the here and now, and now I've got to go back and figure out, what is this theme A, is this theme B, what is this? So it saves a ton of time, not only in accuracy but in employee mental well-being when
Yeah.
somebody's trying to do that analysis and they have that, oh crap moment of like, oh man, this shouldn't be here. And then instead of delivering value, you're solving a problem that you should have realized was a problem 3 weeks ago or six
Yeah.
months ago, right? So yeah, that's a huge piece of kind of like how we operate from a data validation standpoint and how we leverage Mage to to allow us to deliver that value.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've recently migrated from the Mage open source to Mage Pro. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and what advantages you've noticed from Mage Pro?
Yeah. Yes, it was such a great experience, to be honest. As somebody that was self hosting on Google Cloud, I am not an infrastructure guy. I have never managed infrastructure previously. I will say you guys did a phenomenal job with your Terraform scripts of making it very easy to deploy. But when stuff goes wrong in platform, on GCP, and you don't necessarily know how to solve that, that's a problem. So that was kind of when I had the aha moment of like, hey, let's migrate, let's see what this is all about. And honestly, it was great. My initial hesitations were like, oh man, do we want to pay for it? And we've actually ended up saving money by switching to Mage Pro, instead of, we weren't coming anywhere close to getting the full utilization of what we were using on GCP.
Right.
So we were just paying for a lot of overhead that we weren't even scratching the surface on utilization. So um, that piece was great. The GitHub integration, in terms of syncing, uh, you know, to Pro was such a breeze. All of our pipelines carried over, um, and yeah, like now we're off to the races. The version control of being able to still develop locally, push to GitHub and go into Mage Pro and just easily deploy a new version or roll back if there are, in the event that there's issues, has made my life certainly uh, a lot easier. And I certainly have a lot less sleepless nights of worrying about infrastructure issues.
Yeah, no, I remember when you migrated because there was a GCP issue that a lot of people experienced that day. So it was nothing necessarily on Mage's side, but having to figure out your redeployment because GCP
Oh,
made a change
for sure.
is super frustrating.
Absolutely. And we have been, I don't know how long, it's probably been 3 or 4 months now on Mage Pro. We've had zero downtime. It really has been a great experience. And, uh, I haven't even touched on the additional um, product benefits that you get from it, with whether that's um, data integration pipelines that you don't have access to in the open source plan. There's tons of other reasons to check it out, but for us, head and shoulders, not having to worry about infrastructure, and we can focus on just delivering value has been incredible for us.
Yeah, definitely. So part of these learn with mages is kind of sharing either a demo or some kind of like learning element. So I'm wondering if you have anything you might be willing to share with us that would give the viewers kind of an idea of an educational element, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll preface with the fact that marketing agencies probably are operate inherently different than your traditional, user that might be more focused on traditional data engineering. So what I'm going to show you guys is focus really primarily on how we set up pipelines to be multi-tenant friendly, meaning we can spin this up for a new client very easily, because for all intents and purposes, our pipelines, we just redeploy for a new client when we onboard. The inherent logic doesn't change. So one thing that in here, I can go ahead and share my screen here, that I'll highlight, is around leveraging the utils folder to build modular functions that you can import into your pipelines. One, it makes spinning up the initial pipeline way faster, and also two, it makes code changes a breeze because you update the function, and every downstream pipeline is going to pick up that update when it imports that function, as opposed to, man, I've got to go through n number of client pipelines and update the same code block, right? It's not,
Right.
not good, um, you know, code practice to begin with. But so for us, you can see here, like we're importing from our project, our utils folder, our budget pacing folder, and from a budget pacing um, file, we're importing this specific function. So the only thing that we're passing into this function, which you can see down here in our return statement, is our, get project budgets from Podio. We're passing two parameters. We're passing our client slug, which is, I guess this is one thing I can highlight, and I'll highlight it after. But we're passing a client slug, and we're passing a query. The queries need to be custom because each client is slightly different in terms of the platforms, and we're adjusting our where statement for specific advertiser IDs so that the data that we're displaying for them is relevant to only that client, right? But one thing that we've done and this is a good practice. I can't show it on the screen because it's got keys in our ioconfig.yaml, but in your ioconfig.yaml file, we have made it so that when we pass a client slug, so like this client profile, it's dynamically going to connect to that database. So we don't have to rewrite a bunch of infrastructure. It's just, hey, go get that IP address. Let's go get that username and password so that we can authenticate to that client specific database. And that makes spinning these up really easy as well, because when we add a new client, it's just adding a record to the ioconfig.yaml file. And then this function handles all the authentication, and we're off to the races easily in terms of spinning up new pipelines. So that's one thing that and you'll notice this across, like even something as simple as a transform, right? We're still grabbing that transform data frame function from our utils file, or excuse me, our utils folder. And this is repeated all the way through this pipeline, right? And things like sending the report, right? We use this function. We use this function in a lot of pipelines. And actually, there's a Outlook email. We've got kind of like a service bot email through our Outlook, our Microsoft account. And you'll notice here, like that send email is being handled through these kind of universal functions for sending emails, where we just pass in certain parameters and it's going to fire from that email address no matter what, which makes it really easy and modular to use across various numbers of pipelines.
How often does this report get sent?
So our budget pacings run on Mondays. So it will go through, iterate through every single item in our project management system. And then each line item in our project management system has lookup fields that correspond to our media database. And it will go, so like, our project management system has a total budget for that campaign. And then the lookup fields correspond to the actual granular line items in the media database. So it's going to correlate those two. So, if we're spending $100,000 over 10 weeks, at the end of week one, that pacing should be right about $10,000 if you're spending linearly. And if it's off by a certain function, 5%, 10%, we've kind of built in these parameters. If any of those conditions are met, it's going to fire off. It's going to create a data frame of all of the items that have returned like a on pace spend of false. It's going to consolidate those into a data frame that CSV is going to get attached to that send email function, and that email is going to go out to the team. So on Monday morning, the team's got, they're not having to go through and manually check on every campaign to see, hey, is this spending is this spending proportionally to what we would expect? It's at the top of their inbox with only the exceptions. So, it kind of goes back to that tenet of like how we like to leverage technology at Cannonball is doing the work that isn't best suited for humans. Humans are great at solving problems, complex problems, and critical thinking, not repetitive processes that software is great at. So AI hasn't taken us over yet, Cole. So it may soon, but yeah. So that's kind of how we're leveraging that currently. The other piece that I do want to highlight from how we're managing, one of the things from data engineering best practices, when things fail, you want it to fail as loudly as possible. You don't want it to fail in the background and, operations continue to go on as they would, and you don't realize that that report didn't go out, and you don't realize that that data didn't get updated, and you don't realize that that naming convention is wrong, right? So what we've done is we have uh, got callback blocks set up. So our callback blocks are on failure. It's going to fire off a webhook to our project management system. So only on failure is it going to create a line item in our project management system that, hey guys, something's wrong. And when that item gets created in the project management system, hey, this failed, you need to check on this as soon as possible. So it's kind of that double layer of, we see the item come into the project management system, but we also get that automated email of, hey, this is urgent, you should check on this.
Yeah, there's all kinds of really great things built into Mage, callback blocks and how you're using them. There's also built-in alerting to Slack or Teams or other,
Yep.
email. So definitely, other than our, monitoring kind of dashboard, I guess you could say, you have some automated alerting that makes it known if a pipeline fails immediately.
Yeah. And we love, like, the Slack integration is great for us. It's nice to have that, like, accountability of, like, when we're in the project management system, being able to see unresolved tickets is always
Yeah.
like a nice double tap for us. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just before we get to our last question, I just wanted to make everybody aware, just get your questions in if you have them. Like I said, we are on a 1 minute delay, but Parker, what kind of advice would you have for somebody building out analytics infrastructure at an agency like yours? They're like the first data hire, and they're trying to get everything started.
Yeah. The thing I would start with is saying be very intentional about where you spend your time. So like when I joined Cannonball, we didn't have a data warehouse set up. We weren't feeding data in. So the first thing that I needed to figure out was we need to get the data, right? Now, if I had tried to build all those custom pipelines myself, I'd probably still be coding, and I would be pulling my hair out because the sheer number of platforms, the sheer number of different dimensional breakouts and different aggregation levels that we would have to maintain ourselves would just be completely infeasible. But a lot of people like to start with like that type of work. So taking that step back and like being intentional and asking yourself, like, is this something that I should be spending my time on? Or is this something that there's a great vendor out there that provides this service at scale, that's
Yeah.
done this, can handle API changes? That was a really, in hindsight, like just a really great decision that we made. And like your time is better spent on like the gaps that are specific to your agency. So I would say be intentional about where you spend your time, and then start by automating, the boring and error prone work. It's not sexy. It's kind of, it's boring, but you'll be surprised that when you start looking for those little things that are off, how prevalent they are and how much time your team is actually spending fixing those things on the back end when they could have easily been fixed by a simple sanity check on the front end. And it prevents those small mistakes from turning into big problems. So I think, starting small is a great way to kind of learn the organization and figure out how you can immediately add value.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and then, the last piece is just talk to people, ask them, like, what are you spending your time on? Like, and try and remove the repetitive manual work. Like, it's, again, like, I think sometimes we try and overcomplicate some of this stuff where it's like everybody wants to solve the crazy complex problem, but there's a problem that's encountered 150 times a day that
Right.
people write off because it's so simple, but they don't realize like the compounding of that actually equates to a lot of time spent. So take those easy wins, don't overlook them. And yeah, I think that's my that's how I would get started and my advice to somebody.
Yeah, definitely. So again, just real quick, Parker and I will be here for another minute or so, just to catch any last minute questions that might have come in. But Parker, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on today. I think a lot of people will get benefit not only from the marketing analytics discussion, but also the utilization of the utilities folder and building functions in Mage and the callback blocks you explained as well. Those are a couple features that I think that not everybody is necessarily aware of. And so thanks for kind of calling that out.
Happy to. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always fun to get to talk shop and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think that we will go ahead and end. But Parker, have a great day. Thank you for being on Learn with Mage.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Have a good one.